December 18, 1944, Ziegenberg, Germany. The concrete walls of the Adlerhorst command bunker absorbed no warmth from the electric lamps hanging overhead. General Oberst Alfred Jodl stood motionless before a map table, his breath forming faint clouds in the cold air. Before him lay intelligence summaries from the Ardennes. Reports rushed back from forward, units now 3 days into what Hitler called Wacht am Rhein. The Great Winter Offensive meant to split the Allied armies and recapture Antwerp, but Jodl wasn't reading battle dispositions. His eyes fixed on a single paragraph from an Abwehr intelligence officer attached to the 6th Panzer Army. The American ammunition dumps captured near Stavelot. Tens of thousands of artillery shells, millions of small arms rounds, stacked in open fields, guarded by rear echelon troops. The report noted something else. These were merely forward supply points replenished daily from depots further west. Jodl's hand rested flat on the table. He did the mathematics in silence. The numbers didn't merely suggest American abundance. They revealed something more terrible. They revealed impossibility, or what should have been impossible. Across 4 years of total war mobilization, across every factory the Reich had converted and every slave laborer it had conscripted, Germany had never approached this scale of production. The realization arrived not as shock, but as cold algebraic certainty. America had not simply outproduced the Reich. America had redefined what industrial war could be. On December 7, 1941, the United States possessed an army smaller than Romania's. Its industrial capacity, vast, unmatched, legendary in peacetime, produced automobiles, refrigerators, radios, and washing machines. The factories of Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Chicago hummed with civilian prosperity, untouched by war. American steel mills operated at barely 60% capacity. The notion that this sleeping giant could arm not only itself but Britain, the Soviet Union, and dozens of allied nations seemed to Axis planners statistically improbable. German intelligence officers in the Abwehr had studied American industrial reports throughout the 1930s. They knew the numbers. They understood manufacturing capability in abstract terms, but they also understood or believed they understood the limitations of democratic capitalism. Converting a consumer economy to military production required centralized control, ruthless efficiency, and a disregard for worker welfare that democracies supposedly could not summon. The Soviets could do it through terror. The Reich could do it through ideological fervor and conquest. But America? America would drown in committee meetings and labor disputes. This assessment wasn't entirely unfounded. In early 1942, the conversion proved chaotic. The War Production Board issued contradictory directives. Manufacturers competed for raw materials. Steel allocations favored shipbuilding 1 month, aircraft production the next, tank construction the month after. Labor unions negotiated contracts while factory owners demanded cost-plus guarantees. To German observers monitoring through neutral channels, it looked exactly like the democratic paralysis they had predicted. Yet something unexpected happened beneath the chaos. In January 1942, President Franklin Roosevelt announced production goals that made even his own. Military planners went 60,000, aircraft in 1942, 125,000 in 1943, 45,000 tanks in 1942, 5,000 in 1943, 8 million tons of shipping in 1942, 10 million in 1943, and ammunition, vast, incomprehensible quantities of ammunition, not thousands of rounds, not millions, billions. When these figures reached Berlin through intercepts and neutral press reports, they were dismissed as propaganda. Reichsminister Albert Speer, Hitler's architect-turned-armaments chief, calculated the steel requirements alone and concluded the targets were fantasy. The Luftwaffe intelligence branch filed the reports under enemy deception materials. Even Britain's Ministry of Supply expressed private skepticism. The numbers seemed designed to intimidate rather than inform, but Roosevelt wasn't bluffing. He was simply stating what American industrialists had told him was achievable. What German planners failed to grasp was that American manufacturing had spent 2 decades perfecting something the Reich had never truly mastered: standardization at revolutionary scale. Henry Ford hadn't just built cars efficiently. He had created a production philosophy, interchangeable parts, moving assembly lines, vertical integration, continuous workflow that could be applied to anything: tanks, aircraft, ships, and ammunition. The conversion began in earnest in spring 1942. General Motors halted civilian automobile production on February 10. Ford followed on February 22. Chrysler on March 3. Within 6 months, the factories that had produced 5 million cars annually were producing tanks, aircraft engines, artillery pieces, and munitions. The Willow Run plant in Michigan, built by Ford for B-24 bomber production, became the largest factory under one roof in the world. At peak production, it would complete one 4-engine bomber every 63 minutes. But bombers and tanks, while visible and dramatic, weren't the true measure of American industrial might. The real story unfolded in places like Lake City, Missouri, and Twin Cities, Minnesota, sprawling ammunition plants that began as empty fields in early 1942 and became, within 18 months, the largest munitions production facilities ever constructed. Lake City Army Ammunition Plant alone would eventually employ over 18,000 workers and occupy nearly 4,000 acres. Its assembly lines, if placed end-to-end, would stretch 40 miles. German intelligence finally began taking the report seriously in late 1942, when American forces landed in North Africa with ammunition expenditures that exceeded German projections by factors of 10. At Kasserine Pass in February 1943, despite tactical defeats, American artillery fired more rounds in preparatory barrages than the entire Africa Corps had expended in monthly allocations. The shells kept coming, and coming, and coming. The ammunition challenge facing America in 1942 wasn't simply a matter of quantity. Modern industrial warfare demanded dozens of distinct types of ammunition, each requiring different materials, tooling, and quality control standards. Small arms ammunition alone encompassed 30-06 Springfield for the M1 Garand, 45 ACP for pistols and submachine guns, 30 carbine for the M1 carbine, and 50 caliber for heavy machine guns and aircraft. Artillery ammunition ranged from 75mm shells for pack howitzers to 155mm for heavy guns, each type available in high explosive, armor-piercing, white phosphorus, and smoke variants. Naval guns required shells up to 16 inches in diameter. Aircraft ammunition needed to function reliably at 40,000 feet and temperatures 60 degrees below zero. Each cartridge or shell represented a precision engineering challenge. A single 30-06 round contained 5 components: brass casing, primer, powder charge, projectile, and sealant. Each component required separate manufacturing processes, quality inspection, and assembly under controlled conditions. A defective primer meant a dead trigger pull in combat. Inconsistent powder charges caused jams or catastrophic barrel failures. Variations in projectile weight affected accuracy at range. Multiply these tolerances across billions of rounds, and the manufacturing challenge became evident. The solution required converting industries that had never touched military production. The Remington Arms Company, which had produced sporting rifles and shotguns, transformed into a vast ammunition complex employing over 25,000 workers. Western Cartridge Company, formerly supplying hunters and sport shooters, became a military contractor overnight. But the truly revolutionary conversion happened in industries with no firearms experience whatsoever. Chrysler's Evansville plant, which had built automobile transmissions, began producing 45 caliber ammunition. General Electric, known for light bulbs and electric motors, manufactured artillery primers. Milwaukee's A.O. Smith Corporation, a car frame manufacturer, produced artillery shell casings. Eastman Kodak, the camera and film company, turned its chemical expertise toward propellant production. Even the Wurlitzer Company, famous for jukeboxes and organs, manufactured wooden ammunition boxes and aircraft components. The retooling happened with stunning speed. Engineers from automotive plants collaborated with ordnance specialists to design hybrid production lines that combined civilian mass production techniques with military precision requirements. Assembly line workers who had installed car doors 6 months earlier now assembled artillery fuses under magnification. Quality control inspectors who had checked paint finishes now used micrometers to verify shell casing dimensions to thousandths of an inch. Lake City Army Ammunition Plant, constructed on farmland outside Independence, Missouri, became operational in September 1941, just 3 months before Pearl Harbor. By mid-1942, it was producing 30 million rounds monthly. By 1943, daily production exceeded 2 million rounds. The facility operated continuously, 3 shifts, 24 hours, 7 days weekly. Ammunition moved from production to testing to packaging to rail loading without pause. Trains departed hourly for ports on both coasts, carrying boxcars stacked with wooden crates stenciled with lot numbers, grain weights, and destination codes. Twin Cities Arsenal in Minnesota followed a similar trajectory, specializing in artillery ammunition. Denver Ordnance Plant focused on incendiary and armor-piercing rounds. Badger Army Ammunition Plant in Wisconsin, covering over 7,000 acres, produced propellants and explosives. Collectively, these facilities and hundreds of smaller contractors created a production network that dwarfed anything the Axis powers had attempted. German intelligence officers monitoring American industrial output through neutral channels. In Sweden and Switzerland began filing increasingly alarmed reports in 1943. The numbers seemed impossible, yet photographic reconnaissance confirmed endless rows of ammunition storage bunkers at American bases in Britain. Convoy manifests obtained through espionage showed ammunition shipments measured in thousands of tons per vessel. Captured documents from North Africa revealed ammunition supply chains that delivered more ordnance to frontline units in a week than German logistics managed in a month. What the Germans failed to fully comprehend was the American approach to logistics itself. The Wehrmacht operated on calculated ammunition allocations, so many shells per gun per day, rationed according to operational priorities. Units requested ammunition through formal channels, waited for approval, then received deliveries based on available rail capacity and tactical priorities. The system worked adequately when Germany controlled continental rail networks and faced enemies with comparable supply limitations. American logistics functioned differently. Rather than ration ammunition to units, American planners oversupplied everything. Ammunition dumps near front lines held not days of supply but weeks. Reserve stock sat in depots behind the front lines. Strategic reserves accumulated at ports. The philosophy was simple. No American unit would ever fight at a disadvantage due to ammunition shortage. If that meant shipping 10 times the calculated requirement, America would ship 10 times the requirement. This abundance had profound tactical implications. American artillery doctrine emphasized overwhelming firepower over precision. German artillery officers calculated firing solutions, selected targets carefully, and conserved shells for maximum effect. American artillery simply buried target areas in steel. A German regimental commander preparing a limited attack might allocate 50 shells for preparatory bombardment. An American regimental commander would allocate 5,000. The difference wasn't tactical philosophy. It was industrial reality. By late 1943, American factories were producing more ammunition in a month than Germany produced in a year. The mathematics of industrial warfare had shifted irrevocably, and German generals watching the intelligence summaries began to understand that no amount of tactical brilliance or soldier courage could overcome a 30-to-1 production disadvantage. The war's outcome wasn't being decided in France or Russia. It was being decided in Missouri, Minnesota, and Michigan, where the assembly lines never stopped. Angle 1, the human factor, the woman's hands moved with mechanical precision, guiding the brass casing into position, checking the seating of the primer, releasing the cartridge to the conveyor. 10 seconds per round, 6 rounds per minute, 360 rounds per hour. Her name was Dorothy, though the foreman only called her by her station number. Line 7, position 14. She was 23 years old. 6 months earlier, she had been selling dresses at a department store in Kansas City. Now she assembled 30-06 ammunition at Lake City Arsenal, 10 hours daily, 6 days weekly. The plant employed 18,472 workers at peak production. 14,000 were women. They came from farms, from retail jobs, from homes where they had raised children and managed households. Many had never worked outside the home. Now they operated hydraulic presses that stamped shell casings from brass sheets, mixed propellant compounds under strict temperature controls, and assembled primer caps containing explosive compounds sensitive enough to detonate from static electricity. The work was repetitive, exhausting, and occasionally lethal. Accidents happened. Flash fires, chemical exposures, machinery malfunctions. The plant maintained its own fire brigade and medical clinic. Yet they came. every shift, every day through Missouri winters and summers. They arrived on buses and streetcars, showed identification at guarded gates, changed into work coveralls, and took positions on assembly lines that stretched hundreds of yards through cavernous buildings. The government called them production soldiers. The press called them Rosie the Riveter, though most worked with ammunition, not rivets. They called themselves workers, doing what needed doing, earning wages that exceeded anything available in peacetime, supporting families while husbands and brothers fought overseas. The psychological weight was inescapable. Every cartridge Dorothy assembled would travel to Europe or the Pacific. A soldier would load it into his rifle. He would fire it at another human being, or that human being would fire first. The connection between her hands and distant battlefields existed whether she acknowledged it or not. Some workers thought about it constantly. Others deliberately didn't think about it at all. Both approaches allowed the work to continue. Angle 2. The engineering marvel, the Lake City production line, represented manufacturing achievement that would have seemed impossible 5 years earlier. A single .30-06 cartridge required 17 distinct operations, performed by specialized machines arranged in carefully sequenced workflow. Raw brass coil arrived by rail from smelters in Connecticut. Hydraulic presses stamped circular blanks. Drawing machines formed blanks into cups. Annealing ovens heat-treated cups to proper hardness. Body drawing machines elongated cups into casings. Trimming machines cut casings to precise length. Head-forming machines created the extractor rim. Primer pocket machines drilled primer seats. Flash hole machines pierced ignition channels. Meanwhile, separate production lines manufactured primers, powder, and projectiles. Primers required lead styphnate and other shock-sensitive compounds mixed under conditions that prevented accidental detonation. Powder production involved nitrocellulose processing, grain cutting, and coating to achieve consistent burn rates. Projectiles, the bullets themselves, started as lead wire, cut into slugs, swagged into shape, and jacketed in gilding metal. Each component converged at final assembly, where automated machines inserted primers, metered powder charges, seated projectiles, applied sealant, and packaged completed rounds into 5-round charger clips. Quality control happened at every stage. Random samples underwent destructive testing, fired in pressure barrels to measure chamber pressure, velocity, and accuracy. X-ray inspection checked for internal defects. Visual inspection caught cosmetic flaws that might indicate deeper problems. Statistical process control, a concept pioneered by civilian manufacturing, allowed engineers to identify production drift before defects became systematic. The rejection rate averaged less than 1%, remarkable given the volume and speed of production. The innovation wasn't inventing new technology. The innovation was applying mass production principles to precision engineering at unprecedented scale. Every component was interchangeable. Every machine could be serviced without stopping the entire line. Every worker could be trained in days, not months. The system prioritized throughput over craftsmanship, quantity over artisanal quality, yet somehow maintained both. By 1943, Lake City alone was producing more small arms ammunition monthly than the entire British Empire produced in a year. Angle 3, the logistical nightmare. The ammunition produced at Lake City had to reach soldiers in North Africa, Italy, France, the Pacific Islands, China, and eventually Germany itself. This required a logistics network more complex than the production itself. Completed ammunition moved by rail from the plant to the Kansas City rail yards, where it was consolidated into freight shipments headed for coastal ports. East Coast ports like Norfolk, Charleston, and New York handled European-bound ammunition. West Coast ports like San Francisco, Seattle, and San Diego handled Pacific-bound shipments. At the ports, longshoremen loaded wooden ammunition crates into cargo vessels' holds using careful stacking patterns that maximized capacity while maintaining stability. A single Liberty ship could carry 10,000 tons of cargo. Ammunition being dense and heavy filled holds quickly but efficiently. Convoys assembled offshore, waiting for destroyer escorts before beginning Atlantic or Pacific crossings that took weeks. German U-boats prowled shipping lanes. Japanese submarines operated off American coasts. Every convoy risked loss. Once overseas, ammunition moved through supply chains that stretched from ports to depots to forward dumps to frontline units. In Britain, vast ammunition dumps spread across the countryside, each containing millions of rounds stored in earth-covered bunkers to prevent chain reaction detonations from German bombing. From these dumps, trucks carried ammunition to tactical dumps near the front where units drew supplies based on operational needs. The system required constant movement, trains, trucks, ships, and occasionally aircraft, ensuring that ammunition flowed forward faster than soldiers could fire it. The challenge wasn't just moving ammunition, it was tracking it. Every crate bore stenciled codes indicating type, lot number, production date, and destination. Manifest tracked shipments through multiple transfers. Inventory systems, managed on paper and primitive calculating machines, attempted to match supply with demand across global theaters. The system was imperfect. Ammunition sometimes accumulated uselessly in rear areas while frontline units ran short. Calibers got mixed up, ships sank with irreplaceable cargoes. Yet somehow, through organizational chaos and individual competence, the ammunition reached the soldiers who needed it, and kept reaching them month after month, year after year. Angle 4. German perspective Oberst Friedrich von Mellenthin sat in the intelligence section of Army Group Center, staring at a report that made no strategic sense. The document, compiled from interrogations of captured American soldiers and analysis of abandoned supply dumps, estimated American small arms ammunition expenditure on the Western Front at approximately 12 million rounds daily. He checked the arithmetic twice. 12 million rounds daily meant 360 million monthly. 4 billion annually. The numbers couldn't be correct. German intelligence had tracked American production estimates since 1942, watching with initial skepticism as reported output climbed from implausible to mathematically absurd. Early reports were dismissed as Allied psychological warfare, inflated figures meant to demoralize German leadership. But by 1944, the evidence had become undeniable. Captured supply manifests were genuine. Photographic reconnaissance showed ammunition dumps in England and France covering square miles. Prisoner interrogations, conducted separately, produced consistent testimony. American soldiers never worried about ammunition. They fired freely, suppressed everything, and requested resupply casually. Von Mellenthin had fought in North Africa, where German units rationed every shell and cartridge. He had watched Rommel's artillery fall silent not from enemy action, but from ammunition starvation. He had seen panzer units halt offensives because fuel and ammunition couldn't reach them through interdicted supply lines. The concept of ammunition abundance, true operational tactical abundance, existed outside his experience. Yet here was America, apparently achieving it across multiple continents simultaneously. What disturbed German planners most wasn't simply American production volume. It was the casual wastefulness. American infantry units fired at suspected positions without confirmation. American artillery conducted harassment fires throughout the night for psychological effect. American machine gunners laid suppressive fire across entire tree lines. This wasn't disciplined soldiering. This was industrial abundance translated into tactical doctrine. It revealed an enemy that didn't fight despite limited resources, but fought because resources were unlimited. German officers returning from the Western Front brought consistent reports. American attacks began with artillery barrages that lasted hours, sometimes days. The bombardments didn't aim for precision. They obliterated entire grid squares. Trees disappeared. Buildings collapsed. Defensive positions ceased to exist. Then American infantry advanced, firing constantly, supported by tanks that shot at anything suspicious. The Americans didn't maneuver cleverly. They didn't need to. They simply brought overwhelming firepower to every engagement and advanced through the resulting devastation. The psychological impact on German troops was profound. Soldiers who had fought the Red Army on the Eastern Front, who had survived Soviet artillery barrages at Stalingrad and Kursk, reported that American firepower felt heavier, more sustained, more inescapable. The Soviets fired massive initial barrages, then advanced. The Americans never stopped firing. Their ammunition never ran out. Units reported defending positions under continuous American artillery fire for 72 hours straight, shells arriving in predictable intervals, German soldiers huddling in bunkers while the earth shook endlessly. By late 1944, German intelligence had compiled comprehensive assessments of American industrial capacity. The conclusions were presented to OKW, the Wehrmacht High Command, with clinical precision. America was producing ammunition at rates 30 to 40 times German output. This disparity couldn't be closed through increased German production. Reich factories were already operating beyond capacity, using slave labor, scavenging materials from occupied territories. There was no reserve capacity to mobilize. Meanwhile, American production continued increasing. The industrial war was lost. Only the shooting war remained. Angle 5. The technological edge. The American advantage wasn't purely quantitative. It was qualitative, rooted in manufacturing philosophy that Germany had never fully embraced. German engineering prioritized precision and craftsmanship. German ammunition was excellent, carefully manufactured to tight tolerances, reliable, consistent. But German production methods required skilled workers, specialized tooling, and time. Each shell represented hours of labor. Each cartridge passed through the hands of trained craftsmen who understood the work intimately. American ammunition was good enough. Not perfect, not crafted, simply adequate. The 3006 cartridges leaving Lake City Arsenal met military specifications but didn't exceed them. Tolerances were looser than German standards. Finish was utilitarian rather than refined, but every component was interchangeable. Every cartridge functioned reliably, and most importantly, every cartridge could be manufactured by workers with minimal training, using machines that prioritized speed over perfection. This philosophical difference manifested in production numbers. A German ammunition plant employing 5,000 skilled workers might produce 10 million rounds annually. An American plant employing 15,000 semi-skilled workers produced 1 billion rounds annually. The German plant made better ammunition. The American plant made enough ammunition. In total war, enough mattered more than better. Standardization amplified the advantage. American forces used relatively few calibers. The 3006 served as the universal rifle cartridge. The 45, ACP-equipped pistols and submachine guns, the 50 caliber armed heavy weapons. Artillery standardized around 75 mm, 105 inch, and 155 inch. This simplicity meant production lines could specialize, tooling could be optimized, and logistics could focus on moving fewer types in larger quantities. A supply sergeant managing an American infantry regiment tracked 6 ammunition types. His German counterpart tracked 20. German forces, conversely, operated a bewildering variety of calibers inherited from pre-war arsenals, captured equipment, and Allied contributions. German infantry might carry 7.92mm Mausers, captured Soviet 7.62mm rifles, Italian 6.5mm carbines, and Czech 7.92mm variants, all requiring different ammunition. Artillery units fielded German 105mm and 150mm guns alongside captured French 75mm pieces, Soviet 76mm guns, and Czech 100mm howitzers. Each required unique ammunition. Production capacity fragmented across dozens of calibers. Logistics became nightmarish. Frontline units often possessed weapons they couldn't feed. The Americans had also revolutionized packaging and preservation. Ammunition arrived in sealed metal cans with moisture-absorbing packets, protected against humidity, salt spray, and temperature extremes. The packaging allowed ammunition to survive months in tropical jungles or Arctic conditions without degradation. German ammunition, often packaged in waxed cardboard or wooden crates, deteriorated in harsh environments. Pacific campaigns would have been impossible with German packaging standards. American ammunition that landed on Guadalcanal beaches in 1942 remained serviceable through the Philippines campaign in 1945. Angle 6. The psychological weapon. Abundance of ammunition affected morale in ways that transcended tactical advantages. American soldiers knew, with absolute certainty, that ammunition would never fail them. They didn't count rounds carefully. They didn't ration magazines. They didn't save the last grenade for desperate moments. If they needed ammunition, it would arrive. This psychological security translated into aggressiveness. Units advanced knowing they could suppress any resistance. Soldiers took calculated risks because firepower could extract them from danger. German soldiers faced opposite psychology. Every bullet was precious. Every shell represented finite industrial capacity. Machine gunners learned to fire short, disciplined bursts. Riflemen aimed carefully, taking single shots rather than firing rapidly. Artillery crews calculated every mission, weighing tactical value against irreplaceable shells. This discipline was admirable, professional, and exhausting. It meant German soldiers fought under constant psychological pressure, knowing that wastefulness meant comrades would die later from ammunition starvation. The contrast became stark in defensive positions. American defenders facing German attacks fired continuously. Machine guns delivered overlapping fields of fire. Riflemen maintained steady suppression. Artillery responded to every call within minutes. German soldiers attacking these positions described advancing through walls of fire that never diminished. The Americans weren't better soldiers individually. They were simply shooting more constantly, without apparent concern for conservation. German defenders facing American attacks fought with courage and skill, but always with resource awareness. Machine gun crews fired carefully, knowing they might have only 2,000 rounds for an entire day's combat. Mortars fired sparingly, rationing shells for critical moments. Artillery, when available at all, fired brief missions, then ceased to conserve ammunition for inevitable American counterfire. The psychological burden was immense, fighting professionally while knowing the enemy could outshoot them 10-1 indefinitely. This ammunition disparity created tactical feedback loops. American units confident in ammunition supply trained for aggressive tactics. German units constrained by scarcity trained for conservation and precision. In combat, American aggressiveness overwhelmed German precision through sheer volume. The Americans didn't need to outshoot the Germans in accuracy. They simply needed to outshoot them in totality, and they did, every engagement every day from Normandy to the Elbe. The psychological effect was cumulative and devastating. German soldiers, no matter how skilled or brave, increasingly understood they were fighting an enemy that couldn't be exhausted, couldn't be outlasted, and couldn't run out of bullets. November 1944, Zossen, Germany. OKW Headquarters. The planning for Unternehmen. Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine, consumed every strategic mind remaining in the German High Command. Hitler had demanded the impossible, a winter offensive through the Ardennes forest that would split the American and British armies, recapture Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace in the West. The operation required secrecy, surprise, and resources Germany no longer possessed. Yet Hitler insisted, and so the generals planned. General Oberst Alfred Jodl reviewed the ammunition allocations with growing unease. The offensive would employ 3 armies, approximately 250,000 men, 1,400 artillery pieces, and 970 tanks and assault guns. For the initial assault, German units would receive 5 basic loads of ammunition, 5 times their normal tactical allocation. Artillery units would hold enough shells for 3 days of intensive fire. Afterward, they would depend on captured American supplies and whatever could be transported through the Ardennes road network. The plan depended on speed and American collapse. German spearheads would penetrate weak points, bypass strong resistance, and drive for the Meuse River within 48 hours. Along the way, they would capture American fuel dumps and ammunition stockpiles. Intelligence reports suggested Americans maintained massive supply concentrations near the front, easy targets for fast-moving panzer units. The captured supplies would sustain the German advance when organic logistics inevitably failed. It was, Jodl recognized, a plan that acknowledged German industrial defeat. The Wehrmacht could no longer sustain offensive operations through its own production. It needed to capture enemy supplies to continue fighting. This reality, unspoken but understood by every officer in the room, represented the fundamental shift in the war. Germany was fighting America's war now, using America's rules, depending on America's abundance to sustain German operations. On December 16, 1944, at 0530 hours, German artillery opened fire across an 80-mile front in the Ardennes. The barrage was impressive by German standards. Over 1,600 guns firing simultaneously, shells screaming through fog and snow, impacting on American positions held by inexperienced or exhausted divisions. For 90 minutes, the bombardment continued. Then it stopped. German infantry and armor surged forward through the morning darkness. The initial penetration succeeded beyond expectation. American units, surprised and overwhelmed, retreated in confusion. The 106th Infantry Division, positioned in a vulnerable salient, collapsed within 2 days. Over 8,000 Americans surrendered, the largest American capitulation in the European theater. Kampfgruppe Piper, the spearhead of the 1st SS Panzer Division, drove deep into American territory. covering 50 miles in 3 days. Other units captured crossroads, towns, and critical road junctions. The offensive was working. Then Kampfgruppe Peiper reached Stavelot on December 18th. The town sat on a key bridge over the Amblev River. American engineers had prepared the bridge for demolition but hadn't destroyed it before withdrawing. Piper's lead tanks crossed, pushing into the town. And there, spread across open fields south of the river, they found an American fuel dump. Barrels stacked in rows, tens of thousands of gallons. The German tankers, desperately low on fuel, moved to secure it. But something else caught the attention of an SS intelligence officer accompanying the spearhead. Adjacent to the fuel dump sat ammunition, not a tactical stockpile but an operational reserve. Wooden crates stacked under camouflage netting. Artillery shells in calibers from 75 mm to 155 mm. Mortar rounds, small arms ammunition in sealed metal cans. The officer ordered a quick inventory. The estimate came back within an hour. Approximately 2 million rounds of mixed ammunition, mostly artillery shells. The number meant nothing in isolation. 2 million rounds could supply a German army group for a month of defensive operations. But this was merely one dump, at one location, in one sector, near what Americans considered the quiet Ardennes front. The intelligence officer requested his findings be forwarded to 6th Panzer Army headquarters. The message went up the chain, buried among dozens of tactical reports from units engaged in heavy combat. What the intelligence officer noted in his report, almost as an afterthought, would later prove significant. The dump wasn't ancient stockpile or emergency reserve. The wooden crates bore stencils indicating manufacture dates, October and November 1944. Fresh production. Recently shipped. The ammunition had been manufactured in America, transported across the Atlantic, moved through French ports and stockpiled in the Ardennes within weeks. The supply chain from Missouri factory to Belgian field was operating with efficiency that German logistics could never match. Kampfgruppe Peiper never exploited the captured ammunition. Their vehicles used different calibers. Their artillery, left behind in the rapid advance, couldn't reach the dump. American forces recaptured Stavelot 2 days later, but the report reached OKW headquarters on December 20th, along with similar reports from other units that had encountered American supply dumps. The pattern was undeniable. Americans didn't maintain minimal forward supplies. They maintained embarrassing abundance. Jodl received consolidated intelligence summaries on December 23rd. The offensive was stalling. German units lacked fuel. Ammunition expenditure exceeded resupply rates. The weather was clearing, allowing American air power to devastate German columns. But what caught his attention was a section analyzing captured American logistics. The intelligence staff had compiled estimates of American ammunition stockpiles in France and Belgium based on captured manifests, aerial reconnaissance, and prisoner interrogations. The number was staggering, approximately 300,000 tons of ammunition in theater. For context, German ammunition production for the entire year of 1944 totaled roughly 1.2 million tons. For all fronts, all calibers, all purposes, America had shipped 1/4 of Germany's annual production to a single theater and was resupplying it continuously. The mathematics was crushing. Every tactical success, every breakthrough, every captured town meant nothing against that industrial disparity. December 26, 1944. Bastogne, Belgium. The German offensive had created a bulge 60 miles deep and 50 miles wide into American lines. But the critical road junction at Bastogne, encircled since December 20th, refused to surrender. The American 101st Airborne Division, reinforced by armored and artillery units, held the town despite being completely surrounded. German forces launched repeated attacks trying to crush the defenders before relief arrived. They failed not because of American tactical brilliance, but because the defenders never ran out of ammunition. The Americans had been resupplied by air, C-47 transport aircraft, flying through German flak and winter weather, dropped ammunition and medical supplies into the shrinking perimeter. On December 23rd alone, 241 aircraft delivered 144 tons of supplies, most of it ammunition. The defenders, who should have been rationed to survival levels, instead maintained defensive fires at near normal intensity. German infantry attacking Bastogne encountered the same walls of fire they had faced in Normandy. The encirclement achieved nothing. The contrast with German logistics was absolute. German units attacking Bastogne were running critically low on artillery shells. The Panzer Lehr Division, positioned west of the town, had exhausted its organic ammunition supply by December 23rd. Resupply columns, traveling through congested roads under constant American air attack, delivered perhaps 20% of requested ammunition. Artillery batteries were ordered to fire only at confirmed targets. Infantry attacks went forward with minimal artillery preparation. The abundance that had characterized the opening day of the offensive, the 90-minute barrage, the liberal expenditure, was gone. On December 26th, the Third Army's 4th Armored Division broke through German encirclement and reached Bastogne. The relief column came with something more valuable than additional troops: ammunition trucks. Convoy after convoy rolled into the town, delivering fresh supplies from depots in Luxembourg. Within hours, the artillery batteries around Bastogne were fully restocked. The defenders, who had held for 6 days, now transitioned to offense. American artillery began systematic counter-battery fire, targeting German gun positions with concentration that German gunners, conserving their remaining shells, couldn't match. At OKW headquarters in Zossen, the intelligence picture was becoming mathematically certain. Daily reports from the Ardennes showed German units firing ammunition faster than logistics could deliver replacements. American units, despite heavier combat and higher expenditure rates, maintained consistent supply levels. The disparity wasn't tactical. It was industrial. Germany was fighting with finite resources against an enemy with infinite capacity to produce more. Reichsminister Albert Speer submitted his monthly armaments report on December 28th. The document, circulated to senior military leadership, contained production figures for November 1944. German factories had produced 6.2 million artillery shells of all calibers, a respectable number achieved through ruthless efficiency, extended work hours, and exploitation of slave labor. The report also included, for comparison, intelligence estimates of American ammunition production based on captured documents and neutral sources. American production for November 1944 was estimated at 180 million artillery shells, plus 1.4 billion small arms rounds. The numbers weren't precise, intelligence had gaps, but the order of magnitude was correct. America was outproducing Germany in artillery ammunition by a factor of 30. In small arms ammunition, the disparity was even larger. Germany's entire small arms ammunition production for 1944 totaled approximately 1.8 billion rounds, adequate for defensive operations, insufficient for sustained offense. America had produced that quantity for the European theater alone, in a single year, while simultaneously supplying the Pacific, equipping allied nations, and maintaining strategic reserves. Speer's report included a section that Jodl read twice. American production capacity wasn't maxed out. Unlike German factories operating at 110% of design capacity through emergency measures, American plants were running at sustainable production rates with room for expansion. Lake City Arsenal, the report noted, had recently added additional production lines. Twin Cities Arsenal was expanding. The Americans weren't struggling to maintain production. They were casually increasing it. The psychological impact on German leadership varied by temperament. Hitler refused to acknowledge the figures, dismissing them as defeatism. Goering blamed Luftwaffe failures on sabotage and incompetence. Himmler retreated into fantasies about wonder weapons. But professional military officers, the men who managed logistics, planned operations, and understood the arithmetic of warfare, recognized the truth. The war was unwinnable, not because German soldiers lacked courage or skill, not because German tactics were inferior, but because America had 12 billion rounds of ammunition, and Germany didn't. The number itself, 12 billion, came from a captured American logistics document found in a command vehicle abandoned near Bastogne. The document, dated November 1944, projected ammunition requirements for operations through June 1945. It estimated total American ammunition expenditure for the European campaign, from D-Day through final victory, at approximately 12 billion small arms rounds, plus proportional artillery ammunition. The document treated this projection casually, as routine logistics planning. There was no indication that fulfilling this requirement presented any difficulty. It was simply the expected consumption rate, and production would meet it. A German staff officer at OKW did the calculation. 12 billion rounds meant approximately 60 rounds for every German soldier, civilian and child. It meant America had manufactured enough ammunition to shoot every person in the Reich twice and still have surplus remaining. The calculation was morbid and meaningless. Wars weren't won by shooting populations, but it illustrated the industrial chasm. Germany had mobilized its entire economy for war. America had done the same, but America was bigger, richer, more industrialized, and hadn't been bombed for 4 years. On December 28th, with the Ardennes offensive clearly failing, Jodl attended a meeting with Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, commander of all German forces in the West. They reviewed the tactical situation without illusion. The offensive had achieved surprise and initial penetration, but had failed to reach strategic objectives. German ammunition stocks were depleted. American reinforcements were arriving daily. The weather was clearing, allowing devastating air attacks on German columns. There was no possibility of renewing the offensive. The only question was whether to withdraw immediately or fight a delaying action. Von Rundstedt made the decision. German forces would continue attacking for several more days to maintain pressure, then gradually withdraw to minimize losses. The offensive had failed, but more significantly, the offensive had revealed something both men understood but didn't speak aloud. Germany could no longer sustain offensive operations against America. The industrial war, the war of factories, supply chains, and production capacity, had been decided. Everything that followed would be epilogue. In his personal diary that night, Jodl wrote a single sentence that would later be found by Allied investigators. "We are fighting an enemy who manufactures ammunition faster than we can fire it." The realization wasn't dramatic. No alarms sounded. No emergency meetings convened. It simply existed as mathematical fact, acknowledged by professionals who understood logistics. The German generals hadn't lost the war in December 1944. The war had been lost in Missouri, Minnesota, and Michigan, in factories where workers like Dorothy assembled cartridges by the millions, in supply chains that moved ammunition across oceans faster than German trains moved it across occupied France, in an industrial system that produced abundance as casually as Germany produced scarcity. The climax of the ammunition war wasn't a battlefield. It was a logistics report, a captured manifest, a set of production figures. It was the quiet recognition in a German command bunker that America had redefined the mathematics of warfare, and arithmetic, unlike courage or ideology, could not be defeated. January 1945. Western Front. The German retreat from the Ardennes unfolded through the first weeks of January. Units withdrew under constant American pressure, abandoning equipment they lacked fuel to move. Leaving wounded they lacked transport to evacuate. American forces pursuing them didn't maneuver cleverly or execute complex envelopments. They simply advanced behind artillery barrages that never stopped. The expenditure rates would have bankrupted any previous army in history. American guns fired an average of 50 shells per tube daily. Batteries that would have conserved ammunition in 1918 now fired preparatory barrages containing more shells than entire World War I offensives. German prisoners, processed through interrogation centers in Belgium and France, provided consistent testimony. American firepower was overwhelming. Not technically superior, German artillery was accurate, German small arms were reliable. Simply endless. One artillery officer, captured near Houffalize, described defending a position for 6 hours under continuous American shelling. He estimated his battery received over 2,000 incoming rounds. His own battery, in response, fired 43 shells before exhausting their ammunition and withdrawing. The ratio, 46-1, wasn't exceptional. It was typical. The prisoners also reported something unexpected: their own leadership's warnings. Before the Ardennes offensive, German units had been briefed on American industrial capacity. Officers had explained with unusual candor that America outproduced Germany catastrophically. The briefings weren't defeatist propaganda. They were honest assessments meant to prepare soldiers for what they would face. The warnings had been accurate. Soldiers who had fought on the Eastern Front, who had survived Stalingrad and Kursk, stated that American firepower exceeded Soviet intensity. The Russians fired massive barrages, then advanced. The Americans never stopped firing. By February 1945, German ammunition production had collapsed to fractions of 1944 levels. Allied bombing had destroyed key factories. Rail networks were disrupted. Raw materials were scarce. What production continued went primarily to the Eastern Front, where Soviet offensives threatened the Reich directly. Western Front units received minimal resupply. Artillery batteries operated on daily allocations measured in single-digit shells per gun. Machine gun companies rationed belts. Rifle companies instructed soldiers to fire only at confirmed targets within effective range. American forces faced no such constraints. The supply chain from American factories to frontline units operated with increasing efficiency. Liberty ships crossed the Atlantic in massive convoys, their holds packed with ammunition. Antwerp, captured in November 1944, processed 20,000 tons of ammunition weekly. Truck convoys and rail lines moved supplies forward to army depots, then to corps dumps, then to divisional stockpiles. At every level, supply exceeded demand. Units requested ammunition through routine channels and received deliveries within hours. The contrast produced tactical absurdities. German machine gun positions, firing disciplined bursts to conserve ammunition, faced American squads that suppressed with continuous fire. German snipers taking careful shots faced American infantry that simply shot at every window, every hedgerow, every suspected position. The Americans weren't better marksmen individually. They were statistically superior, firing enough rounds that probability ensured hits. Marksmanship became irrelevant when you could fire 100 rounds at a target a German could engage with 5. In March 1945, American forces reached the Rhine River. The crossing operations demonstrated the full scale of American ammunition abundance. Before the assault crossings at Remagen, Oppenheim, and Wesel, American artillery conducted preparatory bombardments measured not in hours, but in days. The bombardment before Operation Plunder, Montgomery's Rhine crossing on March 23rd, involved over 3,500 guns firing continuously for 18 hours. Total expenditure exceeded 65,000 tons of ammunition. For comparison, the entire German army on the Western Front possessed approximately 15,000 tons of ammunition in total. German defenders attempted to contest the crossings with whatever ammunition remained. The results were predictable. American engineers constructed pontoon bridges under fire, lost bridges to German artillery, and simply built more bridges. They had the materials. They had the ammunition to suppress German guns. They had the industrial capacity to replace losses faster than Germans could inflict them. Rhine crossings that German planners had assumed would take weeks required days. Not because American soldiers were supermen, but because American logistics made opposition futile. The final German defenses in the West crumbled through April. American and British forces advanced rapidly, not through brilliant maneuver, but through relentless pressure. German units defending towns and cities found themselves under artillery fire that destroyed entire neighborhoods. Defenders who should have inflicted heavy casualties on attackers instead died in bombardments before American infantry arrived. The tactical formula was simple: identify resistance, request artillery, wait for bombardment, advance through rubble, repeat. By April 20th, American forces had penetrated deep into Germany. Supply lines stretched from Antwerp to the Elbe River, over 400 miles. Yet ammunition continued flowing forward without interruption. Units conducting final attacks on German positions reported full ammunition supplies. The logistics system, refined over 3 years of global warfare, functioned with mechanical reliability. Trains, trucks, and depots moved ammunition forward as routinely as civilian infrastructure had once delivered consumer goods. May 8, 1945. VE Day. When Germany surrendered unconditionally, American ammunition stockpiles in Europe exceeded 2 million tons. The figure represented months of sustained combat at wartime expenditure rates. None of it would be fired in anger. The factories in Missouri, Minnesota, and Michigan continued producing through May, their production lines unaware that the war had ended until official notification arrived days later. Lake City Arsenal alone had over 50 million rounds in various stages of production when victory was declared. The rounds were completed, packaged, and added to stockpiles that would eventually be sold as surplus or destroyed. The total American ammunition production for World War II, compiled by the War Department in post-war analyses, revealed numbers that seemed to belong to different scales of warfare. Over 47 billion small arms rounds, over 23 million artillery shells of calibers 75 mm and larger, over 4 billion rounds of 50 caliber ammunition. The figure most frequently cited, 12 billion rounds, represented only the small arms ammunition expended in the European theater. It didn't include the Pacific, training, losses to enemy action, or deterioration. Total production was nearly 4 times that amount. German production, by comparison, totaled approximately 8 billion small arms rounds for the entire war across all fronts. The disparity, 6-to-1, would have been tactically manageable if both sides fired at similar rates. But Americans fired far more often. German ammunition discipline, born from necessity, meant German soldiers fired perhaps 5 rounds for every American 10. The effective firepower disparity approached 10-to-1 in typical engagements. The human cost of ammunition scarcity appeared in post-war German military analyses. Interviews with captured generals, conducted by American and British intelligence services, revealed consistent themes. General Oberst Heinz Guderian, former chief of the General Staff, stated bluntly in interrogation, "We lost the production war in 1943. Everything after was arithmetic." General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein, who commanded Panzer Lehr Division in Normandy and the Ardennes, noted, "American firepower didn't win battles through skill. It won through mathematics. They fired more shells than we could manufacture." General der Panzertruppe Hasso von Manteuffel, who commanded the 5th Panzer Army during the Ardennes offensive, provided perhaps the most detailed assessment. In debriefings conducted in June 1945, he described the realization that came during the Battle of the Bulge. "We captured American supply dumps that contained more ammunition than my entire army possessed. These were forward dumps, not strategic reserves. At that moment I understood we were fighting an enemy whose logistics we couldn't comprehend. The war wasn't being fought in the Ardennes. It was being fought in American factories, and we had no presence there." The post-war accounting also revealed the scale of American logistics. Over 12 million tons of ammunition had been shipped to Europe between June 1944 and May 1945, 11 months. This represented roughly 25,000 tons daily, every day, without interruption. The shipping alone required thousands of cargo vessels making repeated Atlantic crossings. The rail and truck transport within Europe required tens of thousands of vehicles operating continuously. The supply chain employed over 300,000 personnel dedicated solely to ammunition logistics. For comparison, German logistics at peak efficiency in 1943 moved approximately 3,000 tons of ammunition daily to all fronts combined. American logistics moved 8 times that amount to the Western Front alone, while simultaneously supplying the Pacific Theater, the Mediterranean, and Allied nations. The logistical disparity exceeded the production disparity. America not only made more ammunition, it moved more ammunition more efficiently across greater distances. The psychological impact on German soldiers, recorded in prisoner interrogations and post-war surveys, revealed consistent patterns. German veterans reported feeling tactically competent but industrially defeated. They described winning individual firefights but losing battles because American ammunition never diminished. One captured lieutenant from the 12th SS Panzer Division described an engagement near Caen in July 1944. "We stopped their first attack. We stopped their second attack. Then they called artillery for 2 hours. Then they attacked again with fresh troops and full ammunition. We had 16 rounds remaining for our machine gun. We withdrew." This pattern repeated across thousands of engagements. German units fought skillfully, inflicted casualties, conducted tactical withdrawals, and eventually ran out of ammunition. American units attacked repeatedly, accepted casualties, called for artillery support, and advanced through positions that had been pulverized. The difference wasn't courage or training. It was industrial capacity translated into tactical reality. The statistical analysis compiled by the U.S. Army's Historical Division revealed expenditure patterns that confirmed German observations. American infantry divisions in sustained combat fired an average of 150,000 small arms rounds daily. German divisions conducting identical operations fired approximately 20,000 rounds daily. The American expenditure wasn't wasteful by American standards, it was doctrine. Suppressive fire, harassment fires, and overwhelming firepower were deliberate tactical choices enabled by abundance. American artillery expenditure patterns were even more dramatic. A typical American artillery battalion conducting fire support for an infantry division attack fired 3,000 to 5,000 rounds daily. German artillery battalions in comparable situations fired 200 to 400 rounds daily, not by choice but by necessity. The 10-to-1 disparity meant American infantry advanced under artillery protection that German planners considered impossible to sustain. Yet Americans sustained it for months across entire fronts without degradation. The post-war German military studies, compiled by former Wehrmacht officers working for American intelligence, devoted entire sections to the ammunition disparity. One study written by officers who had served on the Western Front concluded, the American soldier was not individually superior to the German soldier. American tactics were often predictable. American maneuver was sometimes clumsy, but American ammunition was infinite. Against infinity, skill becomes irrelevant. Another study focusing on artillery operations noted, German artillery doctrine emphasized precision, economy, and tactical flexibility. American artillery doctrine emphasized mass, volume, and overwhelming effect. In theoretical terms, German doctrine was superior. In practical terms, American ammunition abundance made theoretical superiority meaningless. A precisely aimed shot is inferior to 1,000 less precise shots when the 1,000 shots obliterate everything. The most telling post-war statement came from Albert Speer during his interrogation in May 1945. Asked when he personally concluded the war was unwinnable, Speer replied, "When I saw the American production figures for 1943, we had mobilized every factory, every worker, every resource. We were producing at maximum possible capacity, and America was producing 30 times more, casually, while maintaining civilian consumption at near peacetime levels. The war was over. We simply hadn't acknowledged it yet. The 12 billion rounds represented more than ammunition. They represented the industrialization of warfare at a scale that made traditional military virtue, courage, skill, tactical brilliance, strategically inadequate. The German generals who realized they had lost when America supplied 12 billion rounds weren't admitting defeat on the battlefield. They were acknowledging defeat in the factory, the warehouse, the supply depot, and the foundry. The shooting war was an afterthought. The industrial war had been decided before most battles were fought, decided by women in Missouri assembling cartridges, by ships crossing the Atlantic, by logistics officers tracking millions of wooden crates, by a production system that turned American abundance into German inevitability. The 12 billion rounds weren't fired in a single apocalyptic barrage. They were fired individually, one trigger pull at a time across years and continents by millions of soldiers whose names history forgot. Each round represented a fraction of a second in combat, a brief mechanical action that propelled metal through air toward another human being. Collectively, they represented something larger, the transformation of warfare from a contest of martial skill into an equation of industrial output. Wars had always required production, arrows, swords, cannon powder, but World War II redefined the relationship between factory and battlefield. For the first time in history, industrial capacity became the primary determinant of military victory. The bravest soldiers, the most brilliant generals, the most sophisticated tactics, all became secondary to the question of who could produce more, faster, longer. America answered that question with 12 billion rounds, and in doing so, wrote the conclusion of the war before many battles began. The German generals who recognized this reality weren't cowards or defeatists. They were professionals confronting mathematical certainty. They had studied warfare their entire lives, mastered tactics, understood strategy, and led armies with skill. But they faced an enemy that had mastered something more fundamental, mass production at scales that made military virtue strategically insufficient. Courage couldn't defeat abundance. Skill couldn't overcome overwhelming firepower. Tactical brilliance couldn't compensate for 10-to-1 ammunition disadvantages sustained indefinitely. The legacy of those 12 billion rounds extends beyond World War II. They established the template for modern warfare, where industrial capacity determines outcomes before armies engage. The Cold War became a production competition, Who could build more missiles, more tanks, more aircraft? Contemporary conflicts revolve around logistics, supply chains, and industrial sustainability. The lesson from 1945 remains. Wars are won in factories as much as on battlefields, perhaps more so. Dorothy, the woman assembling cartridges on Line 7, Position 14 at Lake City Arsenal, never fired a shot in combat. She never stormed a beach or captured a town. Yet she and 18,000 workers like her contributed as directly to Allied victory as any soldier. Every cartridge she assembled traveled to Europe or the Pacific. Every cartridge represented a moment when an American soldier didn't run out of ammunition, didn't ration his final rounds, didn't die because the logistics failed. The 12 billion rounds told a story about nations at war, about what America could produce when motivated, about what Germany couldn't overcome despite skill and courage, about how industrial revolutions change not just how wars are fought, but who wins them. The rounds themselves are gone, fired into history, corroded in forgotten stockpiles, or scrapped for metal, but their meaning persists in total war. The factory floor becomes the front line, and the worker assembling ammunition becomes as essential as the soldier firing it. The German generals realized they had lost not in a single moment of dramatic revelation, but through accumulated evidence that became undeniable. Intelligence reports, captured supplies, production estimates, mathematical analysis. The 12 billion rounds represented that evidence made tangible, proof that America had mobilized industrial capacity at scales Germany couldn't match, wouldn't match, and ultimately couldn't survive. The realization didn't change the outcome. The outcome had been decided years earlier in Missouri, where assembly lines never stopped, and in the fundamental truth that modern warfare belongs to whoever can sustain production longest.